Their Stories Foundation presents Descendants, interviews with second and third generation survivors. Today's guest is Dr. Alex Kaur. Alex has just completed a book called A Blessing, Not a Burden. Thanks for being here, Alex. Welcome to the show.
What you're doing is important, and I think what anybody's doing to help out to preserve the future by remembering the terrible past. So that's kind of my motto, if you will.
Yeah, it's a good motto. So tell me about your family history. What do you know about the history and how far back does it go and where were they from?
I know a lot. So both my parents are survivors. My mother uh, was born in Ports, Romania, Transylvanian Valley. There were two older sisters. Her family, her father was religious. They wanted a boy. And my grandmother was pregnant third time now. And so they were hoping against hope that it would be a boy. And when the midwife comes to deliver, with disappointment, out comes a girl, Miriam. And they said, "Oh, wait, there's another one coming. Maybe it'll be a boy." And with even greater disappointment, my mom was born. And for the first several years, my mom was born in 34 with my aunt. First 4 or 5 years, life was pretty normal. Hitler was not supposed to invade Hungary, Romania. In 1939, 1940, my mom can distinctly remember one time after dinner, the girls were put in a room to play with dolls, whatever, and the parents, my grandparents, were listening to somebody in the radio. And my mom was always kind of the black sheep of the family. She would get in trouble, so she put her ear to the door to listen, and she heard somebody in German yelling something against Jews, and she realized that was Hitler, and she realized something was bad was about to happen. So she told her dad, "We should leave." And he said, "Oh, stupid little girl, you don't know anything. We can't leave."
Wow.
A year later, he did go with his brother to future homeland of Israel to just see if things got bad in Hungary, Romania. If things got bad, would they have an option? And he came back very optimistic. Oh well, let's do it. And my grandmother said, "Well, how can we travel with these two 6-year-old twins?" And so my mom always blamed her parents because she, even as a child, knew something bad was going to happen. That was her sense. And
Wow.
sure enough, in 1943, one time their teacher was replaced by a Nazi sympathetic teacher. My mom distinctly remembers a math equation. If you have 6 Jews and you kill 3 Jews, how many Jews are left? And when they went back to their mom, said, "Why do we have to
Wow.
take this?" And my grandmother said, "Well, we just have to take it because we're Jewish." And my mom never understood that. And then, sure enough, in April of 44, they tried to make a go for it. They got to the edge of their property, and they were the only Jewish family in their small little farm town. And Nazi youth said, "If you take one more step, we'll shoot." And so they were returned to their home. Shortly after, they were put in a ghetto, and then they were put in a cattle car. And for 3.5 days on the cattle car, every 7 or 8 or 9 hours, the cattle car would stop. There were 100 people in the cattle car. My grandfather was in charge of his cattle car. And if you died or if you went to the had to go to the bathroom, it was in the corner, and there was no facilities. Through a little peephole in the cattle car, every 8 or 9 hours, they would exchange gold watches for little spritz of water. And on the fourth day, all of a sudden, the language that they were interacting with was no longer Hungarian; it was German, and they knew they were in trouble. And then, sure enough, a couple hours later, before the scheduled fuel stop, the cattle car starts slowing down, and all of a sudden it opens up to mass chaos. My mom and my aunt grabbed. They were 10 years old. They grabbed their mother's arm, and my grandfather disappears in the crowd. The two older sisters disappear in the crowd. This is a selection platform at Auschwitz, and my mom and my aunt were identical twins, always dressed alike, always looked alike. So somebody was running up and down the selection platform yelling twins, twins in German. A Nazi approached my grandmother and said, "Are they twins?" And before she could say the word yes, 3 Nazis jump out, pull my mom and my aunt away from their mother. The last thing my mom remembers is her mother's arms stretched out, crying and screaming.
Oh God.
And my mom, when she lectured, would say the one thing that she regretted She did not realize at that second that that would be the last time she would see her mother. She never had the opportunity to say goodbye. So they were taken to a barracks and they were tattooed. My aunt's number is A7064. My mom's number is A7063. They were raised to be kosher, and they were taken to their barracks. It was all female twins, aged 3 to 13, 3 to 14. And my mom and my aunt were given bread, and my mom said, "Well, we're not eating because we're kosher, and we're not eating until we see our parents." And one of the older twins say, "See the smoke there in the distance? That's where your parents are." And my mom said, "Oh, that's crazy. Who would be burning bodies?" "Oh, you'll find out tomorrow. You'll meet Dr. Mengele. We're part of medical experiments." So next morning, Mengele came in with his entourage. All the twins, girls stood like attention, like little toy soldiers. And so he was inspecting his new, guinea pigs, of which my mom and my aunt were two of them. And this started in May of 44. And 3, 4, 5 days a week, they would be injected things, body parts compared to their twin, body parts compared to other twins. If one twin died during the experiments, they would kill the other one and do comparative autopsies. I can, John, I can go on. I mean, I know the story very well, but I can continue. So, August of 44, one day the Nazis were not in the guard towers, and my mom kind of just was able to walk out of her barracks, and she looks up at the sky and sees a plane circling Auschwitz. The plane had a smoke signal in the back of it, and my mom looked closely. She's 10 years old and sees an American flag. When I heard this story, I was in my 30s. I said, whoa, 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 wait. How did you know there's no TV, there's no internet? How do you know it's an American flag? And she said, Alex, when I was a little kid back in Romania, we would get letters from an aunt in Cleveland, Ohio. And I always opened up the envelopes. And on the envelope was an American stamp. And I looked up at the plane and I put two and two together. And the point of the story is that at the age of 10, my mom would say she could no longer act like a child. Every day, she had to act like an adult because every day was another possibility that she would be killed. So it was a reconnaissance plane circling Auschwitz so they would not bomb within the camp. Years later, my mom met one of the pilots on that plane, which is crazy.
Oh my
And
gosh.
the experiments continued. And at one point, they injected something in my mom, and Mengele looked at her and said, "Too bad, she only has 2 weeks to live." She was then separated from my aunt and put in the barracks. My mom called it the barracks of the living dead. If you, during Yom HaShoah or other Holocaust celebrations or ceremonies or commemorations, they always show on video people crawling in the barracks. My mom was in those barracks, and she thought people looked more dead than alive. And she found out there was water at the other end of the barracks that she would pass out walking or crawling, I should say. I must survive. I can't give up. And after 2 weeks, her fever broke, and Mengele looked at the fever charts and said, "Okay, well, we'll reunite her with her twin." And so when my mom then saw my aunt, she had not been fed for 2 weeks or nearly 2 weeks. And she looked just like the people in the barracks, the living dead. So for the next several weeks, my mom had to help my aunt get food, and she would steal food, or they called it organizing food. And my aunt slowly got better. And one event in November of 44, they clearly knew the Nazis were losing the war because there would be several days sometimes the Nazis were not in the guard towers at all. So one day, my mom and two other twins go to the barracks to go to the kitchen to organize food, meant steal food. And so my mom and the two other twins, not related, put potatoes in their dress, and they turn around and they hear a Jeep. Next thing you know, there's two Nazis, machine guns. The last thing my mom remembers is the rifle pointed at her head. She wakes up. She thinks she's in heaven. She touches the two bodies. They're ice cold. So she realized that she fainted, and the two Nazis thought they had killed her. They killed the two other girls. So my mom then went back to the barracks to tell the two girls, their sisters, that the two girls had died. Then those same two Nazis found the female Mengele twins in this barracks. They took them from Auschwitz II, which is Birkenau, to Auschwitz I. It's about a 5 kilometer walk. Once they get to Auschwitz I, the Nazi disappears. The girls run into the barracks seeking shelter. Next month, December, they could hear fighting in the distance. There were no more experiments being done. And then in January, it was one day, January 27th, it was snowing sideways. and my mom and the other female twins were in block 23, barrack 23, and they see something in the distance. My mom wasn't tall enough to look out the window, but the older twins see something in the distance moving. Was a Ukrainian army, the Red Army, to liberate Auschwitz. Um, and so they found the female twins, gave them cookie and candy. I don't know if you can see this. That's my mom and my aunt in the front of the line. Uh,
Wow.
that's the liberation picture and video. The ironic thing is, this is always known as January 27th. What happened was the Ukrainians, the Soviets, decided they wanted to do propaganda. So they said, you girls stay here, we'll come back. Several weeks later, my mom said it was several days, but the Auschwitz tour guide said several weeks. They came back with motion pictures, cameras, and my mom loved attention. And so they had video set up, a video camera set up, and I've seen the video. In the beginning of the video, my mom and my aunt in the middle of the line, so she must have run up to the front so that she could be at the front, and that's known as the liberation video and picture. And my mom and my aunt are at the front, and we were able to locate a lot of the other, or figure out who the other twins were. Um, and
When did
so,
when did she when did you discover that picture? When did she discover that picture?
so great question. There was a mini series in 1978 um, called Holocaust, and NBC. It was about a year or two after Roots. It was the first mini series on
Yeah,
network.
I remember it well. Yeah.
So my mom had found out about that and contacted the local NBC affiliate in Terre Haute, Indiana, and said, "I hear there's going to be a movie or a documentary about Auschwitz." And they said, "Well, it's actually a movie. Why are you asking?" And my mom said, "Well, I survived. I'm a Mengele twin. You're a what?" And so my mom then appeared the last night of the series on the local NBC affiliate to answer questions, talk about her experiences. And because of that, she was able to get the video, and then somebody spliced the film. And that's how she started in the early 80s, started figuring out who was who and where they lived. My aunt lived in Israel, and so she knew some of the other twins. In 1984, my mom went to a survivors reunion in Philadelphia, met other twins. And then later that year, they founded Candles, which is Children of Auschwitz Nazi Deadly Lab Experiment Survivors. And then the following year, we went to Auschwitz for the 40th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, January 27, 1985. But so that the video was from the Russians. It was a Russian liberation video, which is ironically shown at Auschwitz now. And we always watch it. I've been back 30 times, but we always watch it with our tour groups because my mom and my aunt are the front of the line. And so it kind of puts
It's
things.
amazing. It's amazing. I mean, your mother had some kind of like amazing, well, first of all, intuition when she was 6 years old, knowing that they had to get out of there, then
Right.
figuring out how to spot the American plane, and and then knowing that she should run up to the front of the line, like she sounds like she's, I don't know, a very special, like old soul, as they sort of call
Yeah.
people like that. Very interesting.
Yeah. So, and then they founded 122 twins, found 122 twins in 10 countries, four continents. And we went back starting in 85. And my mom went back. My mom died during one of our trips at Krakow, in
Oh,
Krakow.
wow.
Yeah, 2019, July 4th, ironically, 2019, the day before we were at Auschwitz. That day we're supposed to go to Auschwitz. And that morning she woke up. We were talking. I turned around and she was dead.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, and
Wow.
my father's story was also unique, entirely different than my mom's.
What happened to her sister?
So, my aunt, after the war, my mom and my aunt eventually ended up in Israel. They were in the Israeli army in the IDF, and my aunt married a Sabra. Um, and Kuti Zeiger, who ironically is related to the famous TV CNN host Larry King. Larry King's last name was
Oh,
not
yeah. Yeah.
Zeiger.
Right.
There were anyway. So to answer your question, my aunt um, in 1987, my aunt started developing urinary tract polyps. One became cancerous, and my mom in 1987 flew to Israel My aunt was a nurse and she didn't want to go on dialysis. So my mom donated one of her kidneys to my aunt. When they took the kidney out of my aunt's body, it had not developed beyond the age of 10, which is when the experiments were done. And so my aunt, for 2 or 3 years in Israel, did fine. And then in 1989, 90, one of the urinary tract polyps became cancerous. And in 1991, she had metastases to her lungs. We brought her here to Indianapolis. We had a family friend who's an oncologist and gave her free chemotherapy. And for a year, she did great. And then she died June of 1993 uh, in Israel. And so
What year did they go to Israel originally?
1950. They
1950.
went back to communist Romania. Initially, after the war, they were in an orphanage and with other children of the Holocaust survivors. And they wanted desperately to go home because they figured they were 10 years old, surely now 11. Their birthday is January 31. Um, they figured, well, if they survived, surely their parents survived. So one of the other twins, the Changara twins, their mother was good friends with my grandmother. So she came to the orphanage and said she was an aunt, signed them out, and they went back to their home in 1946, 47, realized their parents had died, two sisters had died. So they went in, they were taken in by an aunt in Cluj, Romania, CLUJ. And this was by now is communist Romania. And my mom didn't like the Nazis. Sure as heck didn't like the communists. And so in 1950, finally, their aunt and my mom and her twin, my aunt, got visas to go to Israel. And shortly thereafterwards, they were in the kibbutz. And a little funny joke, I once asked my mom, so she was 15 or 16 boys and girls in a kibbutz, all of them Holocaust survivors. And I said, Mom, how was it living in a kibbutz? She said, well, Alex, I learned how to say I love you in 10 languages.
When did they did when did she join the IDF, and did her sister join as well?
Oh yeah, yeah. My aunt was a nurse in the IDF, and my mom was an architect. They were in the '56 war,
Oh
so
wow.
they sometimes not they would switch jobs. Nobody could tell them apart. So sometimes my mom would pretend to be a nurse, and my aunt would pretend to be a draftswoman architect. So they
Wow.
they were identical. So you couldn't. They would date guys when they were in their 20s, and if they didn't like the guy, he would come to the house, apartment, and was dating my mom. So my aunt answered the door. He thought it was my mom. He gave her a kiss. My aunt slapped. My mom jumped out of the closet, and he would run. And they did it multiple times. They liked to play jokes, being twins.
That's
They had
hilarious.
yeah,
And so your dad's story.
a lot different. In some ways, there's some similarities. Both families, my mom's family, and my dad's family, were very religious. My dad is from Riga, Latvia. My dad had three older brothers. In 1941, his father, who was a shoe cobbler, and ironically, I'm a podiatrist, so I guess feet and shoes run in the family. My grandfather was on his way to work, and the Nazis had already occupied Riga, and the restrictions were already in effect. And they told him what side of the street he could walk on. He kept on walking. They killed him on the spot. My dad's oldest brother, Zori, was part of the Latvian Navy, and he was on a ship. They found out he was Jewish, and they killed him, threw him overboard. So within a short period of time, by the fall of 41, my dad had lost his oldest brother and his dad. They were put in the Riga ghetto. My grandmother still had, three boys, and so my dad was the youngest. He was 14 or 15. Leo and Shlomo were in their 20s. And so they wanted to have some semblance of being human. So my grandmother put the tablecloth from their house in her skirt so that when they would have dinners, food in the ghetto, which was on the ground, she would put the same tablecloth. So for Shabbat dinner on the ground with the barbed wire, the boy still has some semblance of being Jewish, being celebrating the tradition of Shabbat dinner. At one point, Shlomo, now the oldest, was on a work detail, and they told him, "You carry this log to the end of the field. When you come back, the Nazi said, 'I'll kill you.'" And my uncle killed a Nazi and escaped to Israel. And my dad, for the next 4 years, my grandmother ended up getting killed in the Rumbla massacre, which there was a forest near the ghetto. And my grandmother told my dad not to go with her. My dad initially went to that side of the ghetto and she realized what was happening. So she said, no, you go with Leo. And sure enough, on November the 30th, 1941, the women, young children, and elderly were killed in a massacre. My dad would have been killed if it wasn't for the fact that his mother said, no, even though you were only 14 or 15, you go with the older boys. And so my dad, for the next 4 years, was in Stutthof, Kaiserwald, Stutthof, and then Buchenwald. And then in April of 1945, like my mom, they could sense the Nazis were losing the war and they were on a death march. My father and Uncle Leo. And my dad thought they were going to be killed. And so they were on a ravine and there was a little gap between the Nazis. So he makes a run for it and they shoot after him. He runs and runs and runs, hides in the ruins of a building. The rumor was that the Americans were in the area to liberate. And for the next several hours, there's fierce fighting. He hears guns and grenades and hiding in a building. And then he hears silence. And then he hears this language, and he knew it wasn't German, wasn't Hebrew, wasn't Latvian. So he comes up with his hands up with two American GIs, and they gave him a Coca-Cola. When I was a little kid, I never knew what Pepsi was. We had Coca-Cola breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I asked my dad, how does it feel to be free? He knew the word free. He said, good. They hid my dad from the platoon leader, the battalion leader, for 2 days because they thought my dad would be considered a liability. This battalion was in charge of building bridges, and the battalion leader was from Terre Haute, Indiana, Andrew Neff. And so on the third day, Mr. Neff met my father, and he kind of quizzed my dad, thinking, he's going to be a liability. My dad knew the languages, he could translate, he knew the terrain, so they put him in a GI uniform, and he was part of the battalion.
Wow.
And 3 to 4 weeks later, my dad was learning English. I have pictures with my dad with Lieutenant Colonel Neff. And early May, they're about to be involved in battle. And Mr. Neff says, Mickey, you don't know how to use a gun. I have no choice. I got to put you in a refugee camp. And my dad looks at Mr. Neff and says, I want to go where you're from, wherever this Terre Haute, Indiana is. And so my dad's in the refugee camp writing letters, and somehow one of these letters ends up on the doorstep of Mrs. Neff in Terre Haute. She telegrams her husband and says, and now my dad's 19 or 20, you need to help that little boy. And so now the war is over. Mr. Neff contacts his GIs and says, go find him in the refugee camp and he can help you. And so for the next year, my dad hung out with the GIs, read the military newspaper Stars and Stripes. It's how he learned how to read English. And he would start writing letters to Mr. Neff, which I have all the letters. And so Mr. Neff on the back end was thinking he's got to get an education. I mean, his 4 years of high school were 4 years of camp. So to make a long story short, Leo did survive, was in Hartford, Connecticut. My dad ended up coming at the age of 19 or 20 to Terre Haute, Indiana. Brother Shlomo was in Israel, became a newspaper executive with Mahariv, which is still today an Israeli newspaper. And so my dad finished high school in Terre Haute. And one of the things I asked you about being a sports fan. So my dad's first year of college, he was very excited. My dad on a good day was 5'2", but he was learning basketball. In Europe, everybody was playing soccer. He never knew what basketball was, but in Terre Haute, nobody's talking about soccer in 1946, 47. So he's very excited because he finds out he's got to take the gym class at Indiana State University. And the gym class is taught by the basketball coach, who happened to be somebody by the name of John Wooden. John Wooden ends up being wins 10
Yeah.
national. And so my dad was studying a lot, and Coach Wooden would see the kids were kind of emulating my dad because he was older. And so Coach Wooden takes my dad aside halfway through the semester and said, Mickey, you're going to get an A. I know you want to go to pharmacy school, but I need you to take the class next semester. You're going to get another A. You're such a good influence. So they became friends.
Wow.
Coach Wooden goes off to UCLA, and my dad gets into pharmacy school. And years later, when I'm a little kid, we have letters from Coach Wooden every year. I have a really good player. His name's Lou Alcindor. I think he's going to be good. And so anyway, my dad became a big sports fan, of which I am as well. And so my father ends up coming back to Indiana eventually to be a pharmacist, still a single, goes to visit brother Shlomo in Israel. There was no internet dating in 1959 or 60. So my uncle Shlomo puts an ad in the newspaper. My mom had just got out of a bad relationship Miriam was already married. And so my mom responded to the ad. My dad spoke no Hebrew. My mom's English was worse. So on the third date, my dad asked my mom a question. She said yes. He pulls out a ring and they're engaged.
Wow. And that was in Israel,
Yeah, they were initially engaged. They met in Israel.
and then they moved back.
My dad had to come back to work, and my mom was the sergeant major in the Israeli army. So it took about 3 months to get out of the army. And so she ends up in Terre Haute, and then I'm born a year later. My sister was born 2 years later. My first language was Hebrew because my mom, when I was born, spoke no English. And
Wow. So was
yeah,
there a Jewish community there at all?
very small. Terre Haute's about an hour and 20 minutes west of Indianapolis. I was bar mitzvahed. It was always very, very important for my sister and I to be raised Jewish. We were not ultra religious. We went to synagogue, went to Sunday school,
But there was a
um,
synagogue in your area?
synagogue in Terre Haute. There used to be a full-time rabbi. There's still a synagogue there. It just celebrated, believe it or not, 175 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we took part in a ceremony, but they have a
That's really
part-time
interesting.
rabbi. It's an elderly Jewish community, but that's where Candles Holocaust Museum was founded because my mom lived there, and my mom and dad worked there, and there was one other survivor that lived there, so they had three survivors, and that's kind of the origin or the beginning of Candles Holocaust Museum.
Wow. And when did you hear about the story? How old were you when you became aware of what happened to both your parents?
At a very young age, my mom had a number. My dad did not have a number. And the best way we learn things, my sister and I, at very age appropriate levels. And I'll give you the best example. When I was 7 years old, my sister's five. She was playing next door at the neighbor's house, and their neighbor is not Jewish. They had a girl my sister's age. And we were used to, when my mom was doing the dishes, to see her number on her left forearm. And so my sister's eating next door, and they're doing the dishes. And my sister says, "Mrs. Baker, where's your number? I thought all mommies had numbers." Mrs. Baker, very smart, not Jewish, not a survivor, said, "Rena, you need to go ask your mom that." Okay. And the houses are, "Mommy, I'm playing at Jill's and I don't understand. I thought all mommies have numbers. How come she doesn't have a number?" And I think most mothers would probably say, "You're 5 years old, you're too young."
Yeah.
Uh, my mom said, "Well, Rena, remember your father and I told you and your brother that bad people did bad things to us. And one of those bad things was they put a number on my arm." Oh, and Mrs. Baker, she didn't have those bad things. Right. So she understood at a 5-year-old level that something different had happened to our parents. And little by little, we would acquire more knowledge. I mean, I didn't have textbooks about the Holocaust, but quite frankly, by the time I was 13 or 14, I knew all the stories. In fact, I got to the point that my parents were embarrassing me. I can't speak for my sister, but I can be 14. I was 14 or 15 years old, and I'd be at a sporting event, and they just didn't understand American customs. And I can remember telling my mom, "Why can't you be like the other mothers?" Which I regret now saying, but it
Yeah.
was at the time very embarrassing. And people made fun of us. And one of the things that happened when I was in fifth grade, kids would throw corn at a house during Halloween. When they threw corn at a house, my mom had memories of what happened to her as a child. So the next day, these are all my contemporaries. They throw a corn at the house. My mom starts chasing these kids around the neighborhood. This is 1972. The next day, things escalate. The next day, we have swastika in our house. Go home, dirty Jew. I had no idea what a dirty Jew was. I didn't know what the word meant. And so my mom was very upset. My dad was upset, but said, "Look, you just leave." She goes, "I can't leave him alone because that's what my father did. He left him alone." So she went and tried to give a lecture at the grade school. Didn't work out. She wasn't a good speaker at that time. She cried all the way through it. And this went on for 2 Octobers in a row. No, my mom would call the parents and say, "Can't your kids take it easy? Oh, Eva, they're just having fun." Nobody knew anything about the Holocaust. And so finally, in the third year, my mom realized that flights to Israel were cheap in October. So she would go to Israel for the whole month, stay with her sister and other
Wow.
relatives.
Amazing.
And my dad, they would throw corn to my dad at the house. My dad would just turn the light off or turn off the TV, take a nap, and the fun quickly died out. Years later, when my mom was lecturing, I think it was in Florida, and we haven't talked about my mom's forgiveness yet, but one of the kids my age was in the audience and was apologized. Yeah.
So So you knew about the Holocaust, and that was sort of a gradual education for you over the years. The parents would reveal more and more, and then that experience with the Halloween and Mischief Night or whatever was like your first experience of anti-Semitism. Did
And
you
not my
relate?
last, not my
What
last.
did you relate the two right away?
Oh
So
yeah.
so you
Yeah.
understood that Jews that were targeted in the Holocaust, and then this became more in your, you know, personal life.
Yeah, I think when I was back then, I think it was more due to ignorance than hate. I don't
Yeah.
think people understood. Nowadays, it's definitely not ignorance, it's hate. And so, but I can relate to kids that, that deal with this in high school and college, which has happened obviously in the last 18 to 20 months. But no, I put two and two together. I realized that we were different because we were Jewish, and I was even more different because I had two parents who were survivors, which was extremely unlikely, especially in the middle of nowhere, Indiana.
So that was sort of a consequence that you witnessed with your mother. She was were there other traumatic post-traumatic stress situations for your parents that you could identify, like maybe not when you were a kid, but looking back on it?
Yeah. No. So one of the things my mom, particularly as she got older, did not like going to doctors. And that obviously was because she was a Mengele twin, and
Yeah.
she would, particularly years later, like going to the doctor was a major problem. She would always say, "Oh, they don't know that much," and she would make all these excuses. And at times, it worked out. She had to really get to know a doctor personally before she would trust him, and I saw that a lot. Um, one of the other things, with my father, he would not be as outspoken about his past, and he would constantly try to make jokes. But once my mom opened up the Holocaust Museum, my dad was kind of forced to speak, and he actually initially had this knee-jerk response that I don't talk about the Holocaust. And once he realized that he could speak about it, I saw a gradual change in his entire demeanor because he could see that, his my mom always was kind of outspoken. My dad took a back seat, but my dad's story and the people's reaction to my dad's story, I think, allowed my dad to become a more warm human being. When I was little, my mom would kiss and hug us. My dad would always be afraid that, he was very, I got to wash my hands. And I can
Mm,
remember that as a 5, 6, 7-year-old. And I said, Dad, your hands are clean. No, I need to wash my hands. And my mom would say, oh, that's because he was in the Holocaust like me, but he
yeah.
really responded differently. So when he was very old, he was in a nursing home once, and every now and then, if his dementia got too mad, he would reenact. One time when the nurse came up, his hands came up, and he thought he was back in the camp. But so yeah, here and there, we would see little instances where post-traumatic stress would be a problem. I tell you one interesting story. Um, my mom and my aunt, before my aunt died, were working on a German documentary at Auschwitz. And part of the documentary, they were filming walking. They were walking on the train tracks. And the producer was saying, well, we need you to do it one more time. And my mom and my aunt couldn't hear him. So he accidentally says, halt in German. My mom and my aunt put their hands up. This was like 1991 or two. And the producer was so embarrassed because he realized my
Yeah.
mom, my aunt's brain halt meant, I could get
Yeah.
shot.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing how little things like that would trigger
Sure.
uh, different responses.
Yeah. And did it get past to you at all? Did you feel any kind of like have you experienced trauma in your life based on the fact that your parents went through this?
So
Um,
the title of my book is A Blessing, Not a Burden, co-authored with my friend Graham Honecker. When I always thought of my experiences as a child, I always felt really special. I never felt like I had a weight or a weight over my shoulders. And when I was in my early 30s, I'm sorry, when I was 26 years old, I should say, I was in middle of medical school and I was diagnosed with cancer and it spread to my lung and I thought I was going to die. And my mom kept on, I was living in Chicago, and my mom kept on calling me and said, look, pick up the phone. So finally I pick it up, and she says, you're feeling sorry for yourself. You need to understand your dad's a survivor. I'm a survivor. You're going to be a survivor. This is your Auschwitz. And when I heard those words, it really helped me a lot, thinking that my parents had overcome something terrible. I was faced with a different foe, but that I could use their strength, their perseverance to beat cancer. And I truly believe um, those words and my parents' strength helped me overcome cancer. So I think my sister would respond to your question differently because she's had some issues.
Right.
But I do think that for me personally, initially as a young person, it felt like I was always special. And then after I survived cancer at age 26, I always thought, well, the old adage, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I kind of thought, well, this is something that for me has only been something as a positive rather than a negative.
Wow, that's amazing. And good for you. And great that your parents were so supportive in that way when you were going through such a difficult thing, and that you used their experience to kind of help yourself, which is which makes you, you're a second generation survivor, and you're showing that in that story. It's amazing. Um, so did later on in life, did you experience anti-Semitism in Indiana?
Yep. My first job was in southern Indiana in Evansville, which is medium-sized city, and two experiences. I was in the operating room. My first week there was right around Christmas. I was doing surgery, and one of the nurses said, what are you doing for Christmas? And I said, well, actually, I really don't celebrate. What do you mean you don't celebrate? Well, I'm Jewish. Oh, you have the horns? I go, No. And then about a couple weeks later, I distinctly remember this. I had a patient that um, somehow found out I was Jewish. And on the third visit, he was somebody with a diabetic ulcer. I had to see him a lot. And he said, oh, Dr. Core, I hear you're a Jew boy. And I said, well, I am Jewish. Is that a problem? He goes, well, you're probably just going to take all my money. And his wife said, oh, John, Dr. Core, he didn't mean that. I said, no, I said, look, you have a stereotype that's incorrect. So to prove a point, I didn't raise my voice. I said, to prove a point, I'm not going to charge you the next three visits. He goes, what do you mean? I go, I want you to change the way you think. I don't know that I accomplished anything, but I didn't charge them for the next three visits. And
Wow.
so yeah, I mean, here and there, I can remember once going with a bunch of guys to a St. Louis Cardinals game. We had to drive a couple hours, and we stop off at a 7-Eleven along the way, and we get back in the car. And I remember, and these are educated people, a little younger than me. I was 30, early 30s. They were probably late 20s. And one of them said, oh, how much did you pay for those at Reese's bar? Oh, I chewed him down. I go, what did you say? I go, I'm Jewish. Oh, I didn't mean anything, Alex. I go, no, no, no. You should not use that language. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, here and there, now it
Yeah.
doesn't happen so much, but
Yeah,
I
that's definitely like an ignorance thing. Yeah. In that time period, I think there was a lot of that ignorance that was just built-in stupidity.
right. I mean, recently, a year ago, I was lecturing here at three pretty prominent high schools. So it was April of 24, and each time I lectured, two or three kids came up to me or raised their hand and said, Dr. Core, we're Jewish. How should we deal with the anti-Semitism that we're dealing with here in high school? And the first time I heard it, I was like, oh my goodness. And then, when I don't know how to answer something, I always think, how would my mom answer it? And I said, well, do you respect them? Yeah, we respect them. Then you need to demand the same respect. And if you don't get that respect, then you need to tell your teacher, your counselor, your parents. You need to tell somebody, because this, you should not tolerate this. Unacceptable. Um, and unfortunately, I heard, ironically, the next 2 weeks in a row, same situation, different high schools, Jewish kids coming up to me and asking me these things in private. So, I know kids. I'm going to lecture at Yale University, Hillel, 2 weeks from today. So that'll be interesting as well.
Yeah. And tell us about your book.
Well, one thing that one of the reasons I wanted to write the book was that most people knew about my mom's story. The reason they know my mom's story, which we haven't touched on much, was that my mom, after my aunt died, met a Nazi doctor, Dr. Hans Munch, who was cleared of all charges at Auschwitz. And my mom was trying to help the other Mengele twins. And so she invited Dr. Munch to come to a medical ethics conference in Boston. He said, no, but you can come interview me in Germany. My mom was terrified to go back to Germany. And so she took a Dutch TV crew with her. The whole idea was to see what he knew about Mengel's experiments. He said, Eva, I don't know anything about Mengel's experiments. And then he kind of said under his breath, um, but I have nightmares. My mom said, what? You have nightmares too? I thought we were the ones with the nightmares. He said, well, I have nightmares because periodically I had to sign a death certificate for all the people in the gas chamber. And he went on to describe in great detail the operation of the gas chamber. My mom was a quick thinker. And my mom, this was 1993, 3 months after my aunt died. And my mom said, Dr. Munch, what you just told me, the whole world needs to know. You, as a Nazi doctor who was cleared of all charges, would you tell the world this? Would you join me at Auschwitz in 1995 for the 50th anniversary? Dr. Munch, with no hesitation, said yes. So
Wow.
my mom came back to Terre Haute, told me the story, and said he doesn't know anything about the Mengele experiments, but he's coming with us to Auschwitz in a year and a half to document history. And I said, Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. The other Mengele twins will not be happy. I don't care what they think. I don't care what you think because I was against it. But now I need to figure out a way to thank him. How do you thank a Nazi doctor? She went to the local Hallmark store in Terre Haute, Indiana, card shop, looking for 2 hours for a thank you card for a Nazi doctor. Nothing seemed appropriate. She went to the local liquor store. My parents didn't drink much, couldn't find anything. So she would think every night, how could she thank him? Then one day, she called me and said, I figured it out. The highest honor I could give another human being in my name only, to thank him, I'm going to forgive him for being a Nazi in my name only. So she prepared a document, and my mom's fifth language was English, so she would typically have a lot of spelling mistakes. So she took the document to her local English professor at Indiana State University and said, Dr. Kaufman, please review this for mistakes. And Dr. Kaufman read the document, said, Eva, you don't have any mistakes, but I think you're forgiving the wrong guy. No, no, I want to forgive Dr. Munch because this way I'm thanking him for documented history. Well, think about it. You might want to forgive somebody else. So on January 27, 1995, Munch knew nothing about this. He said his piece, he documented history, he did show remorse, but he knew nothing about my mom's, what she was going to do. So then she did give him the gift of forgiveness. And my mom knew she had given him a gift, but didn't realize till months later that she had given herself a gift. She no longer had this chip on her shoulder.
Wow.
She no longer resented her parents. She hated her parents because they didn't save her. She hated herself for hating her parents.
Wow.
So she then became much more of a forgiveness advocate. And I truly believe that her life was extended because she survived another 24 years and on to some incredible things. To answer your question about the book talks about the forgiveness, talks about Dr. Munch. One of the reasons I wrote the book was that my dad declined over a very long period of time, and I told him I wanted to write a book about his life. We had found letters that he had written in 2016 that I'd never known about. He forgot about the letters, and he told me in 2020, he said, Alex, well, nobody's going to read the book. I go, I think people might like your story. Oh, no, you can write about your mom. I said, well, I want to write about both of you. So that was the original impetus, is to include my dad's story. We had all these letters that he had written. He had obviously already passed away. And then my mom's story is well documented. We had new parts to the story that had developed even after she passed away. And then I wanted to tell my story. You know, we started writing in August of 2023. October 7th happened 2 months later. We initially had a publisher in Great Britain, but said it would take a year to get it out in print. And Graham and I thought, we need to get this out sooner than later after October 7th. And he had written two other books, sports business genre with a publishing company, Pediment. Pediment expressed interest. And next thing we know, we're done writing in January of 2024. And the book came out in May of 2024. And we're on our third, almost fourth reprinting. You know, I think it's a call to action for other 2Gs, 3Gs, I recently lectured at a Chabad Young Professionals event in Raleigh, North Carolina last week. 80 people there, and I probably should do this more now. I said, and these are all kids 21 to 35. I
Wow.
said, how many people in here are second, third, or fourth generation? Almost half the audience raised their hands.
Wow.
So
And
we
what's
have,
the name of the book?
I'm sorry.
Tell us the name of the book.
The name of the book is A Blessing, Not a Burden, which talks about, to your point, did I have issues? I consider myself relatively issue free, but I've tried to take all the negatives of my parents' past to do something positive, tell their stories. And I think now it's even more important. Each year, we unfortunately lose more and more Holocaust
Yeah.
survivors. I think it's more and more important for 2Gs, 3Gs, et cetera, to tell these stories because a friend of mine, Stacy Gallen, came up with Remember the Past, Preserve the Future. And I think that's so important.
Yeah. And so this is giving you a new sense of pride.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, um, I'm still a full-time podiatrist, and so I still work full-time. But yeah, no, this is a new, it gives me an opportunity to extend my parents' legacy, to tell their stories, to tell my dad's story, to tell why, most people still have the wrong idea about my mom's forgiveness. It is not something that, that my parents argued about this at the dinner table. My dad was against forgiveness, and then after my mom died, there was a Nazi guard from Stutthof named Bruno Day, Dey, that was on trial. And my dad was contacted because he was at Stutthof the same time. He didn't remember Bruno Day. And so they asked for his testimony. And I didn't know what my dad would say. And because he was against forgiveness, he said, well, give me a couple days. So 2 days later, a friend and I, he dictated to us what he was going to say. And he said, look, in your mom's memory, I'm going to forgive him, which I was shocked.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. So
So
this
no,
is
it's
this
definitely a big part of my life now. Sure.
yeah. And this new rise in anti-Semitism, how does that make you feel, or what can you make any sense out of it, or what sense can you make of it?
The anti-Semitism that I dealt with as a kid was from ignorance, as I mentioned. The anti-Semitism that we see now in the world is pure hate. It gave me more of a sense of urgency to write the book with Graham. How do I feel about it? We all know, unfortunately, that Holocaust education does not entirely mitigate anti-Semitism and hate, but you got to start somewhere. And particularly with younger audiences, if you expose them to this history, particularly non-Jewish kids, so that at least they have some idea of, what when words turn into actions and the repercussions of these actions, what terrible things can happen. Hopefully, young people as they grow, become adults, these things won't happen. But we all know that there's hate. And here in Indianapolis, we have a year or two ago, there was a synagogue that was vandalized. And
Right.
so it's everywhere. And, I do, I'm aware of it, but I also know that I'm motivated. If my parents were still alive, first of all, they probably would not have dealt with October 7th very, very easily.
Yeah,
My parents were still alive. I know my mom during COVID was doing, Zoom lectures and Zoom presentation. My dad would be writing letters, which he loved to write. So I'm trying to do my part. So
it's fantastic. And is there anything you would like to say to future generations that might watch this years from now?
my mom had a lot of life lessons which are included in the book, but the one thing that I would suggest is that, if each of us got up tomorrow morning and could think of one thing that we could do to make the world a better place, eventually the world would be a better place. And there would be less hate, less bigotry, less racism, less anti-Semitism. And I think my mom would tell young people, look, I don't want to be tolerated. I want to be respected. And I think if people could respect their fellow classmate, their fellow coworker, and I think they may not agree politically, they may not agree, along different opinions, but I think if we could at least respect each other and have conversations, I think eventually we would there would be less problems in the world.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I'd like to try to end this by just saying your parents' name out loud to give them respect. So tell us both your parents' full names so we can hear it out loud.
Yes. So my mother's name was Eva Moses Kaur, and my dad was born Rockmiel, Rachmiel, but he went by Michael, and then eventually went by Mickey when he came to the United States. So Mickey Kaur and Eva Moses Kaur. And
Wow.
John, thank you so much for allowing me to talk about my parents.
I love the name Rock Meal. That is a very cool name.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Alex, so much. This has been incredibly interesting and inspiring too. That you've taken their story and are out on the road promoting it, promoting the book and talking about it and lecturing. And that's, like you said, that's the most important thing we can do to keep these memories alive and to keep educating people. So I thank you so much for your time, and this has been wonderful.
And thank you for everything you're doing as well in this area.
Yeah, we got to keep going, right?
Right.
Okay, take care now, Alex. Bye bye.